Alright, and this is Faux Sunglas with Cookye, CEO, Mistress, Secretary of Goddesses Incorporated, and the ultimate anime mascot covering all things from the Bishojo Senshi universe, females of the fighting video game world, and women of anime. And so, this is a very special episode because I'm actually responding to a newly acquired friend who's from Arkansas, but moved to Texas to go to college, and so is in a transition of a company that he created called Ocean Flower Studios. And so he has these really big plans of making video games, and they're starting out and they have these great aspirations. And I just want to say good luck to you. I hope that one day we meet Mr. Christian Gully, who I am looking to as the CEO and founder or co-founder of Ocean Flower Studios. So with that said, this brings me to episode 11, which is doing a recap of an old episode that I did, but I'm actually going to put some new elements in it because per request, I'm doing this about Battle Arena Tohshinden, because for the Wii, there's supposed to be a new release of the Battle Arena Tohshinden game. And lately this year, there's been a lot of new releases of new fighting games. The so-called the Capcom versus Namco, or Capcom Cross Namco. San Diego Comic-Con talked about the Street Fighter versus Tekken. And then Ono is talking about a Darkstalkers 4. And then they're talking about the Marvel Collection, which has Children of the Atom, War of the Gems, the arcade fighter. And then we're also looking at possibly a Rival Schools collection. So this is a great year for Capcom games between now, the middle, and the end of next year. So getting into this episode 11 that I'm getting to right now, it's all about Battle Arena Tohshinden. And what makes this very interesting is that Battle Arena Tohshinden was the very first 3D game to incorporate the side-scrolling and side-stepping in 3D combat. Because you see, at the end of the 16-bit console wars between Sega Genesis, Super Nintendo, and of course Atari Jaguar, which was cut out of the competition very fast, along with PC Engine that was 16-bit, you know, there was plans for Sega to create a 32-bit system, which we all knew was the Sega Saturn. But there was also plans for Nintendo to create a 32-bit system called the Nintendo CD. But what happened was the contract that Nintendo made with Sony was so bombastic because Sony wanted so much royalties out of them being the creators of the Nintendo CD that Nintendo decided to take their business elsewhere and create the Nintendo 64. You know, disappointed and betrayed, Sony felt that they took their prototype that was already made of the Nintendo CD and they created the Sony PlayStation and announced that they will be entering the new generation of console gaming with a console of their own. When word about this seeped out into the gaming universe, Sega felt so intimidated that what they had already created with the Saturn, the plans were scrapped, and they started to create the Saturn all the way up from the beginning. So what they did was they got a contract with Yamaha to make the sound card, and different companies to create different parts to make this elaborate system. So while that was being created, Sega in their own right started creating these extra peripheral devices for the Sega Genesis, the 32X, the X-Band, and the Sega CD to prolong the life of that 16-bit system until Sega Saturn was fully created. Their strategy was to launch that before the PlayStation and sport their 2D fighter at the time, which was Virtual Fighter. Sony, when they came in late on the scene, had their own 3D fighter, and that was Battle Arena Tohshinden. Now, what made both systems different is that Sony actually had a 3D graphics card separate, and Sega Saturn did not. Sega Saturn actually had a 3D rendering graphics card, which means it was strictly for 2D, but it could render 3D graphics, which is exactly why Sony PlayStation, muffled my words, won the 32-bit console war. Most people will argue that Tekken was the first game to have the sidestep, but no, it wasn't until Tekken 3 that they had the first sidestepping. Battle Arena Tohshinden to this day remains the very first 3D game for sidestepping. Now, at that time, with Tohshinden and other fighting games and other RPG games at the time, there wasn't so much piracy on video game music. It wasn't as popular, and so people could take their video game CDs and put it in their Discmans at the time. Remember having that 10-second anti-skip Discman that ran on 2 to 4 batteries by Sony, Iowa, Panasonic, and skipping to track 2 you could listen to all the music. For a note for people who are historians of the Tohshinden series, you'll notice that the original Tohshinden 1 music, especially for you, Christian Gully, the theme Russian Roulette, Sophia's theme, is actually a rip from the Japanese second release of Tohshinden 1 called Tohshinden Remix or Tohshinden S Special. Unfortunately, all the Tohshinden releases were not released for PlayStation, they were released for Saturn, so Remix, S, and the other ones that were created were for Saturn. The PlayStation would get Tohshinden Kids, which was a kiddie version of the 3D fighter. A lot of the music was changed in the American release of Tohshinden 1, and so the remixes that you hear that we think are in part 1 are actually from S, actually. And Sophia's theme, Russian Roulette, actually has words in the background. Tohshinden 1 and Tohshinden 2 will remain as the most popular music in the series. And in fact, you know, on my many exploits to book off, I've actually come across this soundtrack right here. This is the original Tohshinden 1 soundtrack, also known as the retake and reloaded tracks. This has the original remix compilations, arranged versions, full 5 minutes of each and everyone's track. Everyone's track remains the same, along with extra musical interludes that are not in the video game versions. These are the full, real long versions. So anybody looking for this, please hit me up, Fosung E Cookye Show. Send me links, your email, and I'll be more than happy to send you the MP3s of this golden find right here. Retake and Remix and Remastered is the name of this soundtrack. The only thing different is that Ellis's theme, Hungarian Entertainer, has been changed to an acoustic version. On that note about the music and such, for anybody who has been into the Tohshinden anime, I have all 3 versions of the ending theme, Lonely Dog, which is the remix Toy Mix, the Kitty Mix, and then the original mix. Of course, those mixes are sung by Ellis. Going on into the Tohshinden series, the series will continue up to 4 sequels. The 4th sequel, known as Tohshinden Subaru in Japan, was released as Tohshinden 4 in Europe. I actually have the Tohshinden 4 European release, but because my TV is not PAL format like Europe, I can really only play it on a PlayStation emulator on my computer. Not to say that my modded Japanese PlayStation cannot play it with the chip. It could play it. My TV is just not formatted for European settings. Tohshinden and Takara, the company goes way back. And to see them coming back with third-party support and creating a new Tohshinden for the Wii is going to be very interesting. Unfortunately, the story will be new, because the story came to an end in part 4. And for those who don't know, Kain has an adopted daughter named Puella, who's also a fighter in Tohshinden 4, aka Tohshinden Subaru. And then, you know, Iji is the only one that really makes it to the future. You know, everyone else is just new characters. And it's the first game to have 3-on-3 combat 3D style. Also, for you anime buff people, the character known as Lancelot, the character also in Tohshinden 4, aka Tohshinden Subaru, is the same voice actor who plays Mickey in Shoujo Kakume Utena, Revolutionary Girl Utena. So this really concludes the historian level of the Tohshinden series. There's not much else to say except for they had many drama soundtrack release, about 3 releases of drama CDs, remix music, which I also got my hands on the 2nd remix and retake of Tohshinden 2. Say Cookie!